And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B. And you're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C. And then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that, which is what? Which is that there's no way for the capitalist to make a profit. He can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marx.
What can be changed is D, the price charged for the good. In the market economy, a homogenous good, the price of a homogenous good is determined by supply and demand. So if an entrepreneur does a good job of forecasting consumer demand and provides a good which is undersupplied, then he will make a profit because he will be able to charge a price, a high price. Conversely, if they do a poor job and they supply a good which is oversupplied relative to the demand in the marketplace, they will suffer losses. If it were really true that the only way that entrepreneurs can make money is by cheating the workers of their fair share, then we would see wages declining when we have seen wages rising steadily since the dawn of industrialization.
This is the understanding of surplus value. So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid, and then you have C2, which is the profit.
This is a horrible nightmare. The one good thing about Marxist economics is that they don't pretend to turn it into mathematical models like the mainstream economics does. The marriage of Marxism and econometrics is a horrifying prospect.
Capitalist makes, and it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. And that's true, and that's an important part of Marxism. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair, and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction.
There's no such thing as a general glut of overproduction in the market economy. Saye's law, which basically states that supply of X constitutes demand for Y, disproves this entire notion. Certainly there can be a glut of one particular good when you have a lot of supply and not that much demand, but then that's handled through falling prices. Of course, the worker or the workers in a factory could never purchase the totality of the output of that factory. You need to factor in the return on capital, as well as the cost of the natural resources. Of course, workers aren't the only consumers in an economy. You also have the service sector, which isn't selling a material good, but rather a service. So they're also going to get paid, and they're also going to buy up goods. Or people employed in natural resource industries, they're not producing goods, but they're going to get a salary, and that salary can be spent on goods if they want. And part of the productive process, or the fruits of the productive process, gets reinvested in capital, this process of capital accumulation and savings and investment, vital to the long-term economic growth of a country.
And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that there is such financialization now is to deal with this problem. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an
The 1.4 billion pounds of cheese stored in a cave in Missouri have nothing to do with the issue of overproduction in the capitalist economy. Rather, Jimmy Carter wanted to give dairy farmers a break, and you can't just buy and store milk, so they entered into a conscious policy of buying and storing cheese. It was just a subsidy. And what's funny is actually they sold most of the cheese. The government cheese has been privatized. Of the 1.5 billion pounds of cheese that were once owned by the federal government, only 300 million pounds remain in federal hands. The rest is stored by the federal government for private interests.
Problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've dealt with and invented to try and resolve this problem, but they still don't resolve it. But it gets worse. It gets worse because of something else. Right? So we talked about this is the supplies, A. We talked about how this is the shipping, B. C is the labor cost. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. So essentially, they're reducing the percentage that C is into the overall cost. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. However, there's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down.
Well, no, if D equals C plus B plus A, well, first of all, D is not A plus B plus C. The price of a good is determined by supply and demand, not the cost to produce it. But if labor costs go down and everything else stays the same, then profit would just increase. He basically has to be positing here that a decrease in labor costs leads to a decrease in price, which it does if you follow his A plus B plus C equals D logic. But that's not actually how price is determined. Price is determined by supply and demand.
C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that...
I mean, this is pure mysticism. If the same product is being created through machinery instead of through human labor, then how is it any different? Or let's say factory A uses the old technology, develops the same product, and factory B uses all automation, no labor, but they end up producing the exact same product. Then how come the product from factory A will have value and the product from factory B won't? That's nonsense. If they're the same product, then they have the same value. And this is all based on an incorrect A plus B plus C theorem. And since the theorem is incorrect, then all these extrapolations are incorrect.
This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor...
No, human labor doesn't create all value. There's also natural resources and capital. They all play a part.
Labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit in the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker...
If this were really true, all it would mean is that prices would keep dropping. I mean, the other thing is, even if you have automation in one particular industry, that just frees up the human labor to do something else. There isn't a fixed amount of work to be done. So automation, if one person can now do the work of 10, that frees up the other 10 to go do the work of 100 in other automated situations. Automation just makes human labor more productive and allows us to enjoy a higher standard of living. It's been a boon since industrialization.
Buy back what he produces, and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated.
How many products are necessary?
And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system. In a rational society, self-driving cars would be a great thing because this job, this labor that human beings engage in called driving would not be necessary anymore. With artificial intelligence and sensors, we'd be able to have all the people involved in driving, Uber drivers, traffic courts, truck drivers, they would all be able to do something else. And labor could be expended elsewhere, we'd have a wealthier society. But under capitalism, self-driving cars would lead to riots in the streets. And this is the problem with capitalism. This is Marxism. This is what Karl Marx wrote.